Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 2 of the Dynasty Fantasy Football League podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Stratton, and league commissioner. And with me here today for this episode on trading in the league is Colin and I, the master of trading.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so we're going to kick it off with a little bit of fun here. I'm a nerd. Everyone knows this. That's why we record a podcast for this fantasy football league. And
Hey, the fantasy football guys started as it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they started just for their league, and then now it's a massive $1 million thing.
Oh, well, hey, here we go. That's the future for us. All right, so I have recorded and documented every trade that's ever been made in the league. Not necessarily the players, but I know how many everyone has made with each other, how many they have total. So we're going to kick it off with a fun little trade game. Colin, you're going to have to guess in order the 5 people who have made the most trades.
Ooh. First is me, because I'm equally a nerd and I love trading.
All right, so I'm going to tell you, you are correct.
Okay.
You have made 61 trades since the inception of the league.
Not enough.
This counts the startup draft, every rookie draft, everything. So you're there at number 1 with 61.
Number 2, I'm going to guess you.
That would be correct.
Ooh.
I come in at a sparkling 46 trades. I've got ways to go to catch up to you. But
15. You better start doing pointless trades like Andy and I do.
You and I have made 12 trades with each other since the start of the league. All right. Now it's where I think it gets hard. I think that was the easiest part of this.
Yeah, 3, I had no idea. I would say, I'm just spitballing right now, I'm going to say Tony or maybe Nick Corum, just because he did his full rebuild. So I'll just go with Tony as 3.
Incorrect. Let me see. Tony is actually... Okay. Well, you're close. Tony is 4th.
Okay.
Tony is 4th with 27.
And then, so I'll go with Nick Corum then.
You were on the right track with full rebuild, but you picked the wrong person.
Oh, Jesse.
Jesse is 3rd with 30 total trades. So I said Tony is 4th with 27. And so are you guessing Nick is 5th, or are you going somewhere else?
I guess I'll go with Nick.
So, as you said, you and Andy have made a number of pointless trades. You guys have made enough for Andy to total 25 and be 5th.
It's funny because most of Andy's trades are like not league shockers by any means. They're like really pointless ones. I can't get him to do any big deals.
So, according to my numbers here, Andy has made 25 total trades. 10 of those trades have been with you.
And only like one of them has been actually important.
40% of his trades have been with you. All right, now we're going to go to the other end of the spectrum. There's actually 2 people tied for the fewest trades ever made. So let's see if you can name the 2 people.
I'm going to go last is Dennis.
That is not right.
No. Okay. Where's he stand?
So he is 2 trades ahead of these 2 people. So there's 2 people that are tied with only 8. He has 10.
Okay. I'm pulling up all my everyone to remind me of the league. I'm going to go Nick Stoll because the only time he trades, it seems like, is with you.
So Nick is correct. He's only made 8 trades, and 3 of them have been with me. So 3 out of 8. It's 37%.
Then I guess it has to be Matt.
Still not right. Matt is tied with Dennis. Yep, Matt and Dennis are just a slight notch ahead.
All right, then.
Come on. It's so easy. Who's
Ben?
Yes, obviously. Because who's the most impossible person to trade with? Because I don't want to give my next 3 first-round picks for a bench running back. So
I've actually traded with him 2 or 3 times, though I've gotten a lot of ridiculous offers.
Yeah. I've only made my one trade with him, and it was all right, but nothing special.
All right, so then we had Matt and Dennis as the next two.
Yep. Which
And
left the
so,
middle two of Nick Corum and Dave, 21 and 20.
okay.
Yeah,
David,
Nick Corum actually has made fewer trades than everyone except for those four people. So,
oh,
yeah.
he did his full rebuild really efficiently.
And then he hasn't really made trades since then.
Yeah, he's just waiting on his players.
He sold all of his players for picks, and now he's just sitting around.
What I thought was interesting is if he either of these two drafts, or maybe a combination of the two, if he decide go all in and use his picks for players, he could have a pretty stud team right now.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't really fit the full rebuild model.
Right. But I believe that might be a better strategy as far as speeding up the rebuild, because you can just use your picks to kind of go for the players you want as opposed to
What's available?
kind of being cornered in on draft capital, or
Yeah.
on undrafted players, rookies.
That might have changed his dilemma, or like when he drafted A-Chain kind of high, kind of reached on him, or when he traded for Dalvin Cook. If he had traded for those two picks for players,
right,
that might have been a little bit different.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to talk next about some trade strategies. You had highlighted a few here in our notes, so let's see what you want to talk about.
Well, I put 5 different strategies just came to mind. I put the negotiator, someone that's going to send out. At least the way I like to do it is I like to feel out someone. I like to feel out what are they looking to get, and that way I can try to put an offer together that makes us both happy. But sometimes people don't want to deal with just like words of text, or they don't respond or whatever. So it really draws things out, or they just see I'm texting them, or again, they're like, man, I don't want to trade with this guy anymore.
All right, so I'll talk about the second one you have written here, because I have firsthand experience dealing with this person. So in another league I'm in, Colin has this strategy as the competitor. This is a person who feels no matter what happens, they have to win the trade. And I was in a league with a guy for 6 seasons, and in 6 full seasons of a redraft fantasy football league, I never saw him complete one trade ever.
Wow.
And I was the closest to ever getting a deal done with him. And it was a year I needed a quarterback. He was the quarterback hoarder. And it was like, I was just throwing, he had like no running backs. So I'm just like throwing him. I had tons of running backs throwing in my flex running back and my third running back, my fourth for one of his quarterbacks. And he just keeps saying, no, no, no. And I'm like, why won't you do these deals? They are clearly going to help you. Like, this guy would be your best running back on your team. And he texts me back and he just says, I just don't like helping other teams. And I'm like,
so he wants to see his own team burn?
So he essentially he basically is like, I won't make a trade with you unless it actively makes your team worse and my team better. And I'm like, well, then literally you're never going to make a trade. Because why would I make a trade that's going to hurt my team? I mean, that's literally the extreme value, or the extreme of that strategy. But it can get frustrating, yes, when somebody's just like, no matter what, I'm going to win. I'm going to make you give extra and I'll talk about some counters to this strategy. The strategy I like to employ is, when I first start negotiating on a trade, maybe I'll ask you about a player that I'm not that interested in, but is valued similarly to a player I'm very interested in. Because if I ask you about a player I don't really like at first, you're going to think that's who I really want. Whereas maybe then I'm like, okay, I think you're asking too much. What about instead of him, we go to this guy? And that's actually the guy that I've wanted the whole time. And I'm kind of just feeling out where you're at. Because all of a sudden, if you pivot from one player to a second, they're going to think you don't like that player nearly as much. So that's kind of a strategy I've employed to maybe counteract somebody that I think overvalues their own players.
That's smart. I always, and I think something you do too, which is kind of interesting, is like, you never want to make the first offer. Like, whenever I've inquired about something, you're well, what would you give me? And that's what some people do, which is smart though, because it's
Well,
like,
if you're the one that initiates the trade conversation, I feel like you should make the first offer.
yeah,
That's
that's
how,
true.
I'm not gonna. You're gonna ask me about a player on my team, and I'm gonna tell you what I want for that person. Like,
That's
no,
true.
tell me what you're willing to give me.
But then that competitor, what I've seen too is people start with this like really low offer, and it can get really like
Annoying,
if I get too low of an offer, I'm like I'm not even going to deal with you.
right?
And sometimes people just want to do a low offer because they're expecting you to come back with something, and
Yeah.
so they want to start really low so that they can get closer to what they actually want. But sometimes if you start too low, then it's just like, yeah, I'm not even going to try to deal with you because it's not worth it. So there's a bit of a question mark on how to do that. I usually like to try to give near value, and I try to use keep trade cut as my basis to get in the right zone, get in the pretty close zone, and then we can work our way from there. But
So I'll let you talk about the third one you have here. I'll call it. I nicknamed it the Ben, but you can call it whatever you want.
so yeah, like this goes with kind of the ridiculous offer. Like Ben, if you're listening to this, sometimes I don't understand why you're sending these trades. Like you're just trying to make people mad. Like you can't expect they're ever going to say yes, right? Like, um, but I actually, Ben, you should chat after this and respond and let us know. Have you ever got someone to accept one of these just like awful, awful deals? Uh, I'm interested to know if it's worked for you in the past.
All right, and so I'll talk about number four because I think of the four, this probably most closely resembles me as a trader. You called it the random trade sender. I frequently do this. I don't even start a conversation. I don't even mention a player I like or anything. I'll just send a trade offer that I think is fair, that I think could help my team and help the other team, and just see what happens. It's a trade I'm willing to do. It's a I remember doing it with Jesse years ago in this league. I just randomly like sent him a trade. I hadn't even mentioned it. It was a Josh Jacobs Tyreek Hill. That's how long ago I had Tyreek Hill, and it was just like I sent him a trade that I thought was value offer. He texts me back and is like, "That trade's really pretty good." I was like, "Yeah." It's like I don't send bad trades, and then he accepted it, and we moved on.
Wow.
So like there's sometimes that I like to do that where it's just like I'll think about I'll think about I like this player who has them. Depending on who has them, maybe I can just throw an offer and just see what they say. And sometimes it's you know if you throw a fair offer and somebody likes it, you can just accept it. You don't even have to deal with the negotiation or
I like that
maybe they
idea. I feel like when I negotiate, I start like talking to people before I actually throw a real offer out.
yeah you
And
annoy
sometimes
us.
some of these offers take like a month. Like there's seriously been like some deals, which we'll talk about some of them later, that I feel like I was working on for like 2 months before actually something got through.
Yeah.
But
All right, and then number five, you have written here horses for ponies.
yeah, or just one
Room.
horse for ponies. Just a guy that's going to send you like 3 players for one good player. And I mean, if you listen to these podcasts, they're always like trade ponies for horses, trade ponies for horses. And but the person with the horse isn't always in a position, that they want to trade the best player in the deal. Most
Right.
people, the rule of thumb is that you need to get the best player in the deal in order to trade. And so ponies for horses really only works if the person giving away the horse, so to speak, is needs a lot of depth.
Yeah. All right, now that we did some, random trade nonsense, let's get into actual trades in the league during this whole off season, right? So we're going to talk about some of these deals and what we think about them, and maybe throw them into keep trade cut and just see what they say about them. Some of these were made 6 months ago, so values on there could be wildly different than when they first happened. So here, let's throw this up. Can you see my screen here? So I have our first trade that we're going to
Yeah,
talk about, which is actually made by the two of us, right? So
that's a good one to kick us off.
it might be the biggest deal that was made since the last season ended. I gave you Jalen Hurts, and I think that was what, the 203. Did you probably didn't even end up making this pick? Um,
Yeah, I think it's two. It's 202 or 203. Yeah, I think
so I
it's two
gave
and
you
two.
I gave you so here. This would be a classic. I This probably does fall into a horse for ponies, right? You're getting Jalen Hurts, who's the best player in the deal, right? You're going for top notch, top five quarterback, and I'm getting back Kyler Murray, Kyle Pitts, John Mechie, and the 109, I believe that was,
Yeah,
which I then flipped into a 2024 first anyways. So it's like,
yeah, for
so
Addison.
I kind of pushed back my deal here. I'll let you talk about your side first, what you were thinking, and then I'll talk about mine.
Sure. So, Kyler Murray, me and Tony had been trading him back and forth the last couple of years, and both of us never really liked him. He kind of has a bad attitude, and I feel like he's a good runner but a bad passer, and it's just kind of sad watching him. And then he gets hurt last year at the end of the year, and we get into the playoffs, and I don't have a quarterback because Stafford and Murray are both hurt, and I lose to Andy by point 0.1 in the first round, and I was so mad. And with Kyler Murray not knowing when he's coming, I feel like I'm in a championship window. I was like, I need a different quarterback, and I'm willing to give him up. I really like Pitts, and I didn't want to get rid of him. But I honestly haven't even used Pitts that much this last couple of years, just because just Atlanta's not really throwing too much, at least especially last year. And so he hasn't been a great play for me. I think he definitely can be and will be because his talent is undeniable. And then Mechie was just kind of a throw in. And then the first is like, I didn't really want to throw it in, but I felt like you and I had been working on this deal, like kind of like back and forth for like 2 months. I'd like text you about it, and then you'd say something, and we'd kind of talk about it. And then like a week or two would go by, and I'm like still thinking like I don't want Kyler Murray on my team. And so then I'd come back to you, and we kept coming back and back and back. And finally, uh, I was just like, screw it, full send, let's go, let's get Jalen Hurts. I think after the Super Bowl, when Jalen Hurts went full like Konami code, just went insane, I was like, just get the guy, let's go.
All right. So from my point of view here, I in general I don't necessarily love to build on running quarterbacks. So I thought I was potentially selling Jalen Hurts at the absolute peak of his value. It's
Yeah,
gone up
probably.
slightly in some of the calculators and stuff. And I do remember basically we got to an impasse where you kept sending me different offers and I didn't like it. And I basically just told you straight up, I will not be trading I will not be trading Jalen Hurts unless you give me Kyle Pitts. I said that was basically a red line. I said, I have to get him in the deal. And then once we started talking, then is I feel like when we actually progressed forward with our,
Yeah,
I feel like my team potentially could contend, but not definitely not in a full contention window. I still have kind of some players come, and obviously now trading for Kyler Murray, who is coming off a torn ACL. I just felt like I was getting three young players that all kind of saw their values dip. So I made this more as like a buy low, sell high type of deal. Like,
yeah,
you know, going into last season, Kyler Murray was a first round startup pick. He was a probably top 12 overall player. And I felt his value really only dipped because people now think he's injury prone because he tore his ACL. And same thing with Kyle Pitts. People were looking at Kyle Pitts as, you know, sometimes these prospects come in and they're all super hyped to the moon and everyone thinks they're just going to be amazing, instantly. And if they're not, then people think they're terrible. And in my opinion, I mean, Kyle Pitts is still like 22 years old. So he's got a long future ahead of him as, possibly, one of the best tight end prospects that we've ever seen. And the same thing, John Mechie, he sat out his whole rookie year because he had leukemia. Like, okay, if a guy was on the field as a rookie and sucked, yeah, I don't think I'd want him as a second round pick. But I mean, he's a second round pick. He played at Bama. He was good there. He's hurt his whole rookie year. So it's basically like he's a rookie again this year. From the sounds of it, he's practicing and doing everything in the
Yeah.
offseason that he should be. And I mean, that wide receiver room's wide open. They got a bunch of random guys. None of them are really good. Like, what, he's not going to play because they have Nico Collins? Give me a break. Like,
Or the
I mean,
5'8" guy, Tank
yeah,
Dell.
yeah, the tiny little whatever slot receiver. Yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, Mechie's the one here that I think has that upside
For sure.
to potentially. So if you
Yeah,
have this keep trade cut, we can look at what the value is at
yeah. So I think
the
it
term
can
of it.
definitely blow up in my face, especially if Jalen Hurts gets hurt. But I just really wanted two alphas
Yeah,
in
no,
my
I get
quarterback
you.
slot.
You wanted to
So
have Jalen Hurts and Justin Herbert, and
yeah. So if you're looking at it, can you see it?
yeah,
So if it still to this day really fair, though, if you start plugging in who was picked. Now I didn't make this pick. I think Andy did, and he got Will Levis at 202. And
and
then
Jordan Addison went at 109. But once again, I didn't make this pick either.
yeah. So then it starts to favor you. And then we'll say that what'd you get? You get 24 mid first. We'll just call it a mid first.
Yeah,
So now you swung it in your favor. Pretty good. So I think it's a good call for you, especially like you said, you're not necessarily, you could win, but you're not necessarily in that window right now.
yeah.
Um,
My team's window right now, it quote unquote window, is, you know, all that you need to do is get one of those 6 playoff spots, and who knows what'll happen.
yeah,
So,
that's for sure.
and I think I'm in that window to at least kind of get in one of those final couple playoff spots and just see what happens if you get a few players to get hot for a few weeks. And
Crazy thing is, Jesse, back in the day before Jalen Hurts, just like a year ago before he went full crazy, he offered Jalen Hurts to me for Kyle Pitts straight up. And at the
I,
time, I had Kyler, Herbert, and I had Stafford, I think. And I was like, I don't need a fourth guy. Like, I really like Pitts. And so I said no, which I gave up far more later on for.
but I don't even want to talk about what Jesse and I potentially had set up for Jalen Hurts before I traded for him, which I gave up too much, in my opinion. But yeah, last offseason, Jesse and I had a deal worked out where I would give him my 2023, no, sorry, my 2024 first, which he ended up getting anyways, Carson Wentz and Zamir White for
Oh,
Jalen
my.
Hurts. And I was the one that said no
Oh, man.
because I'm a notorious Josh Jacobs hater and could not get out of my head that. So our next deal is kind of 3 deals in one. Tony and Colin love trading with each other. So the first deal they made, I have up here right now, which was basically, in my opinion, it's Nick Chubb with a throw-in of Jerome Ford for Ramondre Stevenson. I don't care about 4th and 5th round picks. They're basically useless. They're just random flyers that you're going to throw in your taxi squad and hope for something. But to me, this is one team's looking to win now and get some veterans. The other's looking to maybe get their roster a little younger. This trade specifically. What do
Yeah.
you
So I'm gonna take over. I put it all in the keep trade cut real quick. Oops, hand raise. And
so you're going to talk about all 3 deals in one.
yeah.
Okay.
So basically, kind of exactly like you said, Tony had pushed all his chips in, as we kind of know, and he was trying to figure out how he could rebuild without trading Patty Mahomes. Patty Mahomes was his last kind of big chip that he could do. And I had some younger guys, and as everyone kind of knows, I'm starting to push all my chips in right now. So all these deals, they came as 1-for-1s essentially. They had some picks thrown in, but like you said, this was the core.
Yeah.
For me, Nick Chubb, he's just established. He's 2 years older, but with New England, you just never know. Like one guy who did really well 1 year, the next year he's relegated the second guy, or he's not giving him the same amount of work. They have a new OC, and so maybe it could get better for him, but it could get worse. Nick Chubb, he didn't do as well once Watson took over. But I think he's going to be incorporated more into the passing game, which is going to help him a lot more this year. I've seen him as high as like the third or fourth running back overall in some rankings. And so,
I've actually seen somebody have him as their RB2. So,
oh, really?
yeah.
Yeah. So I just figure if I could get him, and I think he's one of the best running backs in the game, if not the best, just like on the ground. And if he can increase his passing work, that'll help. Greg Dulcich, I like. But after that Darren Waller trade to the Giants, I feel like they don't really have another kind of like an alpha, a big X receiver. And I mean, he's not an X because he's a tight end, but he's that bigger guy in the middle of the field that I think is going to help the team. Dulcich definitely can be that, but we just don't know. And then Jerome Ford was just basically throwing with the handcuff to Nick Chubb, though Jerome Ford was not on my team anymore. And then Chris Godwin and George Pickens. I initially Tony drafted Pickens, and then I traded for him in one of the deals, and then he really loved him. I really love watching George Pickens play, and I think he's awesome. But I've been listening to some podcasts, and they were just talking about how Pickens is super reliant on just the go ball and the contested catch, which isn't necessarily repeatable.
Yeah. The good question is, why do you constantly have to make contested catches? And the answer is usually because you can't separate, you can't get away from defenders. So you have
And
you essentially
that
have
was
to
just
rely on being spectacular catch wise, which, like you said, is less repeatable than just getting open. Like Justin Jefferson, who's just always open.
For sure. I mean, it's his first year, so he definitely can change that. And then, so who knows? But Chris Godwin, I had before I traded him, Chris Godwin. So like we've been just trading people back and forth. Yeah. But Chris Godwin, what I really liked about him was he's gonna get you 5 for 60. Maybe you can get a touchdown, 5 for 70, 6 for 70, and he's gonna get you 10 to 12 points every single game, just because he's kind of that PPR machine. And so I like that I can just put him in my roster, probably get 10 to 12 points, and then let my big dogs like Hurts and Herbert and let them eat. Yeah. So,
I mean, if there's one thing I know about Baker Mayfield, it's that his receivers are always PPR machines. So,
I mean, Mayfield definitely scares me, but like when you're looking at his history, when he had Landry and OBJ did nothing, and he's to me Evans, and then Landry is basically he got like wide receiver 10 or 12 or something. I think that can be Godwin.
All right, so I threw another deal up here on the board, Jesse and Doyle. This was pre-draft, so a lot of draft picks were involved, but essentially Jesse gave his usable depth, is what I called it, to Doyle for 3 second-round picks and Malik Willis. Like, he gave him Jacoby Myers, Kadarius Toney, and Brian Robinson, were all guys that I like usable depth. They're all probably guys that are going to be guys that you can consistently get points from in your flex, that you can put in starting lineups. And I mean, Jesse at this point has no need for players like that on his roster, right? His roster is just a void of anything besides, some young players and future picks. So, I mean, I thought this was, Jesse looking to, pick up some picks this year as opposed to having all of his picks in 2024. And then, take a flyer on Malik Willis, which I think now is just completely has no value of any kind, but the third string quarterback on a run first team.
So I'm going to pull up the keep trade cut right now.
Okay.
So keep trade cut favors Doyle here. Just if you have the picks. I think I remember the picks. They might not be exactly these picks, but I thought they were somewhere around there. I thought for Jesse, it definitely made sense, like you said, because it's pointless having those guys. Maybe Kadarius Toney you could have kept because I feel like
he's still young.
Yeah. But the other two definitely get rid of. And I mean, they're talking about Kadarius Toney as the potential wide receiver 1, but now he's already hurt again. Like I saw something on Sleeper or something today. But I don't think it's a major injury. But yeah, so overall, I thought it was good for both of them. Doyle, his depth was slim, and so I thought it was a good trade for him. So what is interesting is you might have this trade that you can pull up a little bit later on, or maybe we'll talk about later on, is that Jesse then turned around and sold most of these picks and then acquired Dotson, which I think was really savvy because I think Dotson is going to be I'm preaching the choir for you because I know you love Dotson.
Yeah,
But I did.
I kind of made a similar move to Jesse in our other dynasty league we're in, where I kind of took some of my seconds and some stuff that I didn't think I'd really need and used it to get Jahan Dotson, who was a guy that, I really think could, because I mean, we all know I love slinging Sammy Howell. He's the future. So watch out, everyone.
So what are the chances you think Sam Howell hits?
I mean,
And is like a solid starter for 10 years.
no, 10 years. Jeez,
5
that's a
years.
long freaking time. I mean, I think of the guys drafted last year, he probably was my favorite quarterback prospect, even above
Okay.
Kenny Pickett. I just think he's got the kind of dual threat ability. He's kind of got that savvy to him, but teams didn't necessarily love him, obviously, because he got drafted in the 5th round. But
Right.
all right, so I have our next deal here. Let's throw it up. All right, so this was a pretty big deal also. David and Doyle made this deal. David got Lamar Jackson from Doyle, and he dealt the stack of Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Waddle. I will say here, I absolutely love this deal for Doyle. I think he smashed this deal. I that's all I'll say. I think that he, getting Jalen Waddle is just a game changer. The guy, and he just catches everything, and to have that stack together for, Lamar is obviously the best player in the deal, but that's not always necessarily the only thing that matters. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have much to say about it other than I do this is a deal I would have made in a heartbeat if I was Doyle for Lamar.
Yeah.
Because I
So
remember he threw him on the block, and it was like within hours this deal went through, and I was like, how did this happen so fast? Like, I don't get what happened here.
So I mean, I remember talking back a while ago with Dave about Tua because I was interested in Tua, and I think maybe I was offering Kyler straight up, and because I was so worried about Kyler at that point, and he was also worried about Tua,
Tua and
and
the concussions.
and I was worried about Tua, and so I think Dave was really concerned about Tua's future, which. I mean, definitely, I guess if he gets another couple concussions, he could be out of the league. So it's a little bit risky for Doyle. But I remember Doyle texting me about this trade, and I was like, bro, accept. You have to accept this now. Do it before he changes his mind. Just because Waddle, to me, like it says here, he's a top 5-10 dynasty wide receiver. And then Tua is a downgrade. But he might not be a massive downgrade, though. I do like Monken, and like obviously I love Zay Flowers and everything else they brought in Baltimore. So I think Lamar could really eat. I mean, I think there's definitely a path for him to be QB1 again. I mean, he's a former MVP. So I mean, if that hits and Dave wins a championship for it, I don't think he's going to be worried about it.
No,
but
Dave wants to win now, and he feels that Lamar having that upside of Lamar Jackson, which it does make sense. I mean, I understand what Dave's doing here, but I still think he gave up. I think he could have gotten a piece back from Doyle in this deal that would have then made me feel less like it was smash on the other side. Like say he gets, even if it's a random flex worthy wide receiver or running back, or just something else in the deal.
Like if you got Kadarius Toney back. I mean, I don't know.
That's actually exactly who I was thinking, but
I don't know if Doyle. I think Doyle did that deal later on, but
I can't remember either.
But if you got Toney or like maybe a wide receiver 3-ish kind of guy that has some upside, then yeah. But yeah, overall, we'll see what happens. But I love Doyle. Just he's kind of stacking his team with younger players and kind of setting himself up, and then he's also getting that the kind of depth too to try to help him out.
Yep. All right, so next deal we have here is between Nick and Tony. This was a pre-draft deal for some there's some picks involved here. So this is where Nick traded away the 108, which Tony ended up using on Quentin Johnston to get Dalvin Cook and Gerald Everett, and then a late third, I believe. I know what Nick was kind of thinking here. He felt like he wanted a running back and didn't think that at where he was picking there that he'd have any really viable options. I think he early on he definitely thought that other than Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs, there really wasn't going to potentially be somebody else there that he would like. So he was looking to, I mean, this was him kind of, as you said, trying to use his picks to potentially, accelerate his rebuild. But this might have burned him a little bit and then made him realize he didn't want to do that. When you do it on one player and that one player gets cut from his team and now isn't signing with another team and has now legal issues. And so it could be a, it sounds good in theory, but maybe in practice it wouldn't have panned out well.
Yeah, I know Nick definitely regrets this when he said so multiple times. And Tony, when he was like, "Oh, I might be able to get this," I was like, "Dude, do it now! Like, you have to." But the one big thing is like, I understand him trying to get a running back, but I'm just wondering like, why Dalvin Cook? I mean, I know he's a good player, but when you have such a young roster, why are you buying a 28-year-old? Like, I would buy someone who's 25, maybe he's an RB2, but maybe he's thinking that his youth that he's acquired this year and last year with a veteran like him, Dalvin could put him in contention to win. So if that works out, then definitely it's worth it. But and you can't necessarily know that Dalvin Cook's going to get cut. And I'm guessing he wanted Everett because at the time he did not have who's the tight end just got drafted by the Bills that he drafted.
Dalton Kincaid.
Yeah, Dalton Kincaid. He didn't know for sure he was going to get Dalton Kincaid. But
I mean, I kind of like Everett. I kind of like Everett this year, but I mean, it's another veteran type player that
we'll see what happens when
his team.
We'll see what happens. Yeah, so Quentin Johnson and the 108 are basically the same, so it doesn't change it too much. But you take some swings, you take some misses.
I mean, that's the thing. If you win, here's my other, trade strategy advice from earlier. If you win every single trade you ever make, you're not trading enough, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you're worried, I feel like a lot of people are worried about losing a trade, so they don't want to make trades. And so
here's the next one we'll talk about. Here's another, I'd say, relatively big deal. You and Dave made this, and kind of counter to a lot of the trades we've looked at and have been making. A lot of these trades have been, teams that think they need to get younger or rebuild are trading with contenders, and they're kind of flipping assets in that manner. This is actually a trade. I know 100% that you are trying to win this year, and I know 100% that Dave is trying to win this year, and you guys made this deal. So I'll let you kind of talk about this because there's a lot of moving pieces here.
Yeah,
so I look at this deal and I don't even remember it happening, and then I'm looking at it and I'm like, how do I not remember this? There's a lot of stuff going on here, like some major assets moving around. So
yeah, so I'm here. I'm plugging this in to keep trade cut real quick. I'm gonna pull it up and you tell me if I need to add any.
So here I'll quickly just run through the names in this deal. So Colin acquired Ryan Tannehill, Brandon Cooks, Saquon Barkley, and AJ Brown, and a fourth for Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp.
Yeah, I think I got it here. Is it up?
2. So basically, I see it now.
Yeah, so basically, once I had Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown was like a massive target for me. I really wanted that stack. I'd been reading articles when I was researching Hurts about how him and AJ Brown are just like massive, like best friends, and they love each other. And both of them now have long deals and they can just build on that relationship. And so I really wanted AJ Brown. And then after the draft, when Levis was drafted, he had Tannehill as his second quarterback. And so there's kind of a question as to whether Tannehill will be the starter all year. And that wasn't as big of a concern for me since I have now Hurts and Herbert. And so I'm not as worried about that. And so that was kind of this initial selling point, like, hey, you need a second quarterback. Stafford, we know he's going to start. And when he's not hurt, he's a decent quarterback. He's a key QB2.
Hey,
And
I
so
mean,
that's kind of
I'm a Stetson Bennett stan over here, man. He's
really.
coming in there. No, not at all.
And so we were kind of just going back and forth with that. And he was building a deal with Tony for a while. And I remember talking to Tony in so me and the conversation with David kind of broken down and we hadn't talked about it for a while. And then Tony was starting this deal with him. And I was like, all right, Tony, out of respect for you, I'm not going to offer anything until you say you're done with him. And so he'd been kind of going back and forth and Tony kept saying oh, I'm not sure. And it'd been a week. And I'm like, dude, I'm giving you to the end of the day or I'm going to give him another offer. Cause I felt like he was getting a good deal. And so that's kind of where it picked up. And I think Cooper Kupp definitely is a legit player and he's probably rated higher for this year than AJ Brown. But at 30 and potentially not having Stafford next year or in 2 years, I feel like AJ Brown's the better player. Saquon, when he put him on, I think he put him on the block, which kind of got me oh, maybe I can get Saquon. I was like, man, that would be awesome if I could, because I felt like my wide receivers were the best part of my team, and I wanted a couple good more another running back or two. And so I wanted Saquon, which after him potentially holding out maybe won't work for me. But assuming he plays, I think he's a top 5 guy. And then Brandon Cooks was kind of a throw-in because I had asked him about Brandon Cooks earlier in the offseason once he went to Dallas, and we couldn't get any deal done. And so when he wanted McLaurin and Sanders, Cooks was there just to kind of balance out the keep trade cut.
Yeah,
and then,
I mean, it's definitely a piece that makes sense in the grand scheme of the deal.
And then so then ultimately that's how we just figured out. He was going back and forth. I offered him Sanders or DeAndre Swift, and he was going back and forth. And he decided to go with Miles Sanders because you know what you're getting in Miles Sanders for the most part, as opposed to Swift. He's younger, which might fit his team better for the long term, but you have no idea what's going to happen to DeAndre Swift. So it made sense why he wanted Miles Sanders.
Yeah, I mean,
this deal too was the first, I think, ever conditional. Because
this was the first deal that involved a conditional draft pick. You are correct. If Matthew Stafford retires or gets hurt, I don't know. So
I think it was 4 games. If he doesn't play 4 games,
then you have to give him another 3rd round pick.
Yeah. So then I think it wins for him.
Yeah. All right. What's next here? We're going to skip one. We're going to go. Yeah, we're not going to talk about Nick and Dennis's draft picks because we kind of talked about that. Where's the one I wanted to find here? So we're going to talk about you and Dennis. That's the deal.
Ooh, the Pollard deal.
The Tony Pollard. Oh, so it's after the draft, right? So
yeah,
that's one of the only ones that's after the draft. Do you have that pulled up on Keep Trade Cut?
I'm going to pull it up right now.
Okay. Here it is.
All right.
So here's the deal. I've got, so you acquire Tony Pollard and some random 3rd and 4th round picks in 3 years. Who cares? And you give up Jerome Ford, a 2025 first and a 2026 second.
Yep.
So this is clearly, I mean, I'll talk about it quickly.
Okay, go ahead.
So, I mean, this is clearly in your realm of you're trying to win this year. Dennis probably is still in in the midst of his rebuild. So he's looking to pick up some assets for the future, picks up the 25 first. At this point, those are hard to gauge, but now that we're past the 2023 draft, it's like maybe those are a little more viable. You'll kind of see some players emerging in college that you might think those picks will be. I feel like those picks are easy to acquire when nobody has any idea who they potentially could be. But as soon as there starts to be like rumblings of maybe it could be these guys, that's when I feel like those picks start going up in value. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
clearly you're.
So him and I were talking a little bit about Gibson because he put Gibson on the board, and I was thinking, hey, I need another running back, and nothing was coming. And then ultimately, somehow he talked about Pollard, or he put him on the block or something. And I was like, man, if I could have Pollard, I could just have a stacked team. And so we started talking, and ultimately he wanted this, and I thought it was too much, to be honest. Like, I feel like because he's in a contract year, he's never been a head guy, but like every fantasy analyst I ever like listened to like loves Tony Pollard, and they're like, man, if he ever gets like full down work, he's just gonna go insane. Um, and on his franchise tag, that potentially happens. Now, everyone tells you don't buy second contract running backs. But I'm kind of in that window where, Ben has a solid team and Nick has a solid team and a number of other people have solid teams. And I'm just like, you know what? Full send. Here we go. I'm already pushing the chips in. It might absolutely screw me. Pollard could get hurt. I mean, maybe he's not on the Cowboys. He's on a bad team next year. But I just believe in the talent. I think he's a really good player. And I'm hoping he's young enough, and with my other team, that if I can keep winning, even in 2025, like it's going to be a late first. And so I have it as a mid first, but if you change it to a late, that changes the algorithm a little bit. But ultimately, like you said, it's just pushing the chips in. And if potentially Jacobs and Saquon hold out, then I definitely need Pollard. So that's ultimately how we decided. And first ever trade between me and Dennis. So
Yeah, so that filled out your. Can you hear me? It says my internet is bad right now, but
yeah, it just I think whenever we switch between it breaks up. But
okay.
I can hear you now.
All right, so we had a few others we were potentially going to talk about. There's only one that I'm going to focus on of those medium trades worth noting. On our, we kind of made a list of deals here. So the last one I'm going to talk about, we talked about it briefly earlier, was Jesse basically using two of those second round picks that he got from Doyle, trading away some of his depth pieces for Jahan Dotson. He paired the two of them with Evan Engram and Zay Jones. So I think this is a Matt likes to contend. He doesn't want to rebuild. I know that. So he's looking for players that he thinks are going to help his roster. So he wanted Evan Engram, and just pick up a few picks just to try to get some extra young players. Like we talked about, I'm a big fan of Jahan Dotson, so I think this for Jesse's team build, I think this makes a whole lot of sense. Trying to, if right, he's got these 8 or whatever, I don't even know how many he has at this point, 2024 first round picks. But if you're going to build a young core to then fill out with a bunch of draft picks, I think the best spot to go is wide receiver. And now Jesse has, he has Jahan Dotson, he has Jordan Addison.
Addison.
I can't remember who else he has, if anybody. But I mean, those are players that he's going to be using to with his team. And then here Matt. It says Matt wins the deal, but like we said, sometimes in these trade calculators, yeah, if you just keep throwing stuff on one side, obviously eventually it's going to be higher. But
Right.
if we like, if Dotson, he was hurt briefly last year, but I feel like when he was on the field, he was as good as some of these other guys that everyone's hyping up. He was putting up similar points per game numbers to like Olave and Wilson for portions of the season, and that's
Yeah, and I was listening to a podcaster, and he was talking about how he loves Dotson, and really, him and Terry were 1A and 1B. And so you get a younger version of Terry
Yeah.
who could potentially be better. I definitely could. I mean, if he ends up, say, in the Olave, Wood, or Wilson category, like, then Jesse definitely won the trade. So I think you have to keep in mind when you're hashtag winning or losing trades that these values are changing all the time. And
Oh, yeah.
so it can change on a dime. So what may seem like a good trade at one point could obviously be bad later on.
All right. So now quickly, we're just going to talk about, as far as trading going forward, where we kind of see teams falling as far as, contenders, rebuilders, what, where maybe predictions as far as like where we think teams are going to end up and what they're going to be looking to do during the season. As far as is there a team that looks like a contender right now that we think by the end of the year, this whole thing could be blown up and could look completely different? And maybe some of these teams that, we look at as younger teams that maybe are going to take that next step up and become contenders and maybe start to look to, trade some younger players and go for wins this year.
Yes.
So anybody you want to talk
Sure,
about?
I'll just start with, I mean, the most obvious one is Jesse, we just talked about. He has a million firsts next year. He has not much. He has Dotson and Addison, not much else. He has Love, I think, which is not bad. But it'll be interesting to see what he does next year. Like, is he going to pull a Nick Corum, or he's going to sit in each of those spots and he's going to draft? Or is he going to start trying to use some of those first and start buying some players? Oh, Watson, too. That's a good piece. And so that'll be interesting to see because he can absolutely control next year's draft
Yeah.
with all of his firsts.
Yeah. So here, let's look at it. He's got his own, Nick's, Matt's, Andy's, Doyle's, yours, mine, and Dave's. I mean,
8.
he's got 8 firsts, and like of those firsts, some of these teams aren't going to make the play. Not all these teams can make the playoffs. Therefore, some of
Right.
them are going to have shots at being earlier picks. And so, or sorry, I forget how we do drafting in this league, but you have Nick, Matt, and Jesse. So I think they're the bottom 3 teams from this year, which means Jesse essentially has like the 3 best chances of landing the first pick. Of
Right.
landing high picks. Yeah, like we talked about, he's got.
And you saw Nick Corum last year. I felt like he had 5 picks, and then a lot of the picks were with contenders who like ended strong, and like I
Yeah.
think Nick stole, but he or whoever was picking for him picked good, picked well, and he landed some pretty high picks.
Yeah. Yeah, Jesse, as we said here, has, Jordan Love, a complete wild card, but I feel like could be a decent piece to try and build around. But then he has Christian Watson, Jahan Dotson, Jordan Addison. So I think those are all, 3 young wide receivers that he could definitely see as part of a core of his team that contends.
Though the one thing is I stole AJ Dillon from him, so he's got to change his name.
Oh, okay. All right, so I'll talk about a team that I think we're going to see some changes. Let's talk about Dave's team. So, Dave fancies himself a contender. I think this is his last hurrah because I feel like if this team is not in contention, week 8, week 9, it could be the prototypical just blow it up and see what happens type of roster. There's a lot of Dave has a lot of players that, Austin Eckler is just stud running back, but if some of his other depth is not performing to where he thinks, like these are players that he should be looking to deal off of, Eckler, Cup, McLaurin, even Hopkins, Sanders. I feel like all these guys are guys that if this team isn't clicking, and I feel like there are question marks around a lot of his main core of his team that, his Ezekiel Elliott on his team still. The guy's not even on a roster.
Yeah.
Michael Thomas, who knows how long, what's going on with him. So
He has the Thanos gauntlet of like over 30-year-old wide receivers, or he's like acquiring them all. Which I mean, they're like 2-3 years ago, like they were top 10 wide receivers, and if they
Yeah,
can hold that glory, then he can win a football championship. And I mean, in talking to him, he's like talked to me like, hey, this is my last year or two, and if I can win one, sweet. But other than that, I'm gonna have to blow it up. And
yeah,
I mean, he's gonna have to do absolutely what you're talking about. Otherwise, if he doesn't sell some of these pieces, then he's gonna have nothing to fall back on except some
yeah,
seconds, and maybe like a first in a year or two. And
yeah. Because
so,
let's, I mean, let's look at his draft capital. He has a second next year, and then a first and a second in 25, and then obviously 26. So yeah, like you said, it could be until 2 years before he really starts getting top end talent into the roster to try and turn things around. So
yeah. So I mean, I think that's a good point. He either goes for it all, and if it's not going well, then he's just gonna have to blow it up.
yeah. All right, back to you. Who we looking at?
All right, since you're there, we'll just go. I'll stay on my full rebuild. Go with Dennis.
Where is he?
So I think one of the big things. I mean, you don't have to because obviously Nick Stoll has won with bad quarterbacks, but I think one of the first steps in a dynasty superflex is getting two solid quarterbacks, and I think he's acquired that with Lawrence and Richardson here. Um,
Not Zach
but
Wilson. Come on.
he tried with Zach Wilson, which I mean at the time made sense. I would have picked Zach Wilson there too, but it didn't work out. But he's trying to go a little bit young. He does have Garrett Wilson, which I think is awesome. He's got some decent capital there. And then the interesting thing to me, if you go back up, is what is he going to do with George Kittle? Um, because George Kittle, he's what 30, and he's got a couple years in him, and maybe tight ends can go longer till 35 or something if you're Kelsey, Antonio Gates, etc. But he's pretty injury prone, so that might catch up with him pretty quickly. And so selling Kittle's probably what I would expect to be his next move. And then maybe selling Gibson to an RB needy team just because Gibson is in his last year. And so usually they tell you sell second year contract guys, and so or second
I,
contract guys. So
I don't think Dennis is selling Gibson until we see him in games and hopes that he, actually looks like the player that everybody seems to think he's going to be every year, and then he like fumbles his first carry and then gets benched for the rest of the season.
yeah.
Um,
Though with the new coordinator Bieniemy, and
yeah,
they're talking about him catching a lot more balls, and if that happens, then he's going to increase his value, and then that'll be a good time to sell.
yeah, sounds like Clyde Edwards-Helaire to me. Uh, so I'll talk about. I'm trying to see if there's another one of these blow up. Oh, here we go. All right, back to back to back. It's not happening. So here's another team that I feel has some aging players that if they're not performing, the team could be underperforming and maybe look to sell. I mean, obviously, Nick's fortunate that he does have Justin Jefferson to just kind of fall back on. As you said, he's been the prototypical. You don't actually need those stud quarterbacks. You can just fill out your roster with high performing wide receivers and then just a bunch of running back depth and just find the right matchups and play the guys in the right weeks. He's got pretty. Looking at his team, he still has a pretty solid roster. But yeah, this is another one where if things maybe start to tip in the other way, that you know Nick might make more than 8 trades. So, but we'll
Yeah,
see what
that'll be
happens.
interesting. We'll see if Nick actually wants to trade at that point.
Yeah,
But I keep
Nick does have this. I think this is one of the most important assets that anybody's gotten in just a random trade. Nick owns Jesse's 2025 first round pick, which, you know, the way we do our picks right now, that looks like it's probably going to be a very high valued pick, right? Because
right.
we assume Jesse's not going to have a good team this year, which then means he's going to be one of the first people picking in that draft. This was Nick got this pick in a Jordan Love deal. So Jesse got Jordan Love and gave
I remember
this.
that. That was
It's a
crazy.
long time ago. It was in the Fab War of 2022.
Yeah, that was hilarious.
So I mean, yeah, Nick he's got a pretty balanced roster as far as having a good number of well-performing veteran assets, but also has some of these young pieces that, I mean, if Nick ever decided to sell Justin Jefferson, I'm sure he could get an absolute haul and a half. Like you could get
Yeah.
so much, but I don't necessarily think he'll necessarily be looking to do that. He'll probably be looking to move some of these other pieces and then just keep Jefferson as part of his build.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to him and he's told me basically he likes to have young and old pieces, which
Yeah.
makes sense because then you're not committed either way. I keep thinking Derrick Henry's done. Like I've thought this
I've,
for the last 4 years, and he just keeps doing it. So who knows? But
yeah.
then Kamara potentially he could get suspended, and
James
so
Conner,
yeah, and
you
James
know,
Conner's nearing the end. We have no idea what's going to happen to Rashad Penny. Um,
yeah.
so I could definitely see him winning another title, but I could also see it collapsing. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
All right. Any other teams you want to talk about?
Um, yeah, so go to Matt real quick. So, like you said, I think Matt is an interesting case study here because he he's been kind of pushing chips in a little bit, but not too much because he still has like Jahmyr Gibbs. He now has Swift, but he traded the 110 to get Swift. So he's kind of doing different things. Like I offered him like Jacobs, I think straight up for the 103 and maybe plus something, a 103. And he didn't want to do that. He wanted to go with Jahmyr Gibbs, but then he's buying Swift for the 110. So it kind of feels like he's doing two things at once. But like you said, but I also tried to get Roshan Johnson from him at one point, and he's like, no, I want to stay young. So I think he's kind of towing the line between contender and building for the future, which definitely can help him. But if he makes the playoffs, then all bets are off. Who knows what happens?
Yeah.
But at this point, I mean, I don't want to knock on wood. Who knows? But I don't think that team's good enough to win the whole thing at this point, and they also doesn't have tons of picks to supplement. So it'll just be interesting which direction he goes. Because if he tries to trade Jahmyr Gibbs, he could get a solid player to help
Yeah.
him.
Right.
But if it'll be interesting to see, like what you said.
All right, last team I'll talk about is Doyle's team. we talked about his team a little bit earlier about, and I was talking to him and, I was just kind of looking at his roster and, he was basically telling me like he was pretty satisfied with some of the moves he's made and how he's kind of like completely transformed his team. And I was like, oh yeah, I feel like you've made some moves. And then when I really looked and dove into his team, I'm like, I kind of like his team quite a bit. And he's made a lot of these like what I would say under the radar moves. Like he's not making these like other than his Lamar Jackson deal. I'd say really none of the moves he's been making have been like blockbuster, everybody talk about it type of moves.
Right.
But I feel like he's kind of behind the scenes been kind of playing the buy low, sell high game. Like he's been picking the right times to get off of some players before some value dips and maybe getting on some guys that have seen their value drop. Um, he's got, Travis Etienne, who I think, is pretty solid as his first running back. And he's got Jalen Waddle now and Devontae Smith and Tua Tagovailoa. So he's just really trying to rebuild that 2019 Alabama squad. I can't remember if that's what year they were on. But
I didn't even make that connection. That's smart.
even though none of them are on this, or Waddle and Tagovailoa are. But yeah, I mean, that's a good stack to have. I just feel like he's made some, like I said, like low key under the radar moves to kind of have a pretty solid roster and some pretty good depth, at different places. You're looking for some, like I said, he's got this, Jacoby Myers, Kadarius Toney, guys that you're going to think,
You
are
could
you
throw him
going
a
to be, are you
flex.
going to be happy with them as your wide receiver 2? No, but are you going to be fine with them as your third flex? Yeah, those are solid players that are going to get you that 8 to 10 points that, you need in bye weeks when some of your other players are down. And I think too often, when people analyze teams, especially in like a dynasty league or a league like ours where we have a lot of starting spots, right? We start 10 players and 8 of those are non-quarterbacks. And I think that depth can be an underrated asset. You know, people always want to win the deal by getting the best player in the deal, or like you look at the team starting lineup and say, "Oh my God, look at their starting lineup; it's so amazing." But then all of a sudden, a team gets 2 injuries and they're completely handcuffed because they don't
Right.
have anybody on their bench to, like I said, just get 8 points. Sometimes that's way more valuable than you realize in some of these bye weeks, and when you get into the playoffs with maybe teams doing different things. Like some teams, oh, let's get a look at some of these new young guys, or if they're out of contention, stuff like that. But so I just thought he's made some nice behind the scenes moves to to have a quality team that could make some noise.
Yeah, I agree. Especially if Javonte Williams comes back and is himself again. I think they'll
Yeah.
be a solid team.
All
Pull
right.
up Andy real quick.
Oh, I was gonna wrap us up, but I guess
Sorry,
you
just
got
pull up
one more.
Andy and then we'll peace out. So I just wanted to highlight the juggernaut that Andy can become, because Andy's the anti-me. I'm the no patience, trade a million times, and Andy apparently trades, but a lot of them are not consequential.
Yeah.
But he's been getting this tons and tons of capital, and he's not trading it, but he's got potentially a stud team.
Yeah.
And I think we talked about this in texting when we were talking about, like, if this last year when he had all that really high capital, if he just traded it all for like studs, how his team just could be even more insane. But he's
Yeah.
got like Bijan, and he has
Brees
what's the dude?
Hall.
Brees Hall, yeah.
I mean,
And so
yes, Andy has done a very good job of acquiring assets and just kind of, like you said, just stockpiling and just not being patient, just letting, I feel like he's one of the only ones that employed the productive struggle strategy coming out of the startup draft. If we, on our next episode, I am going to dive into the startup draft with somebody. We're going to go back to 2020 when all of us had no clue what we were doing and roast everyone, because there's going to be some awful picks. Everybody made bad picks. Just heads up, everybody made terrible picks. But Andy, seeing he basically just started only drafting rookies at some point, and just like he basically came into the league and just said he wasn't going to compete in year one. He just started acquiring those young assets and just finding the ones that popped, and then using picks later. The other fortunate thing Andy had happen to him is, the
kept
way we
winning the
do
first.
our draft order, Andy's drawn the first overall pick 2 years in a row and gotten
Yeah.
2 absolute beast running backs, and that's basically what he needed. So he's been lucky enough to have all the assets that he had, and then also now kind of luck his way into 2 more just outstanding assets, which, I mean, it's a testament to, like you said, being patient. And because he easily could have traded those before they became the 101, and then we wouldn't be talking about this. But
Right.
okay, so before we wrap up, I'm going to ask you same thing I asked Nick in the first one. Any bold predictions for our league, for fantasy in general, for the NFL in general? Anything?
This is maybe bold, but maybe not bold. Nick Stahl is not going to be a back-to-back-to-back
Okay,
champion.
that's like the least bold prediction that I think it's
All right,
ever.
here's another one, and this is maybe selfish, and but Zay Flowers, who I really really like, is going to be the best wide receiver on his own team this year. And this year is going to have the best season of the 4 first round wide receivers that were drafted.
Okay.
I just think they're converting their offense to pass first. Addison, I think maybe could outperform, but then Johnston and what's the other?
JSN.
Yeah, JSN. They're both kind of the third option, and I just think Zay Flowers is gonna be really good. So I think that's gonna be my big one.
All right. All right. Well, that concludes episode 2 here. Colin and I dove into some trades. I think we talked for a little longer than I expected, but hey, hope you guys enjoy it.
Sorry
And
if you get bored. Watch
like
it
I
in
said,
parts.
Episode 3, I will be diving into the initial startup draft and what happened in that, and the guest is a mystery, so we'll see who that is when the time comes. So, any final words, Colin?
I would just say in trading, just treat it as like stocks, in the sense that they go up, they go down. I know some people get really tied to a player. Like, I mean, for instance, me, I'm never trading Justin Herbert. You can trade me your entire team, and I'm not going to trade him. But they're just stocks in a lot of ways.
What's
And
that sweatshirt you're wearing?
yeah, I
Can't
wore
tell
it
me.
just for here, bolt up, baby. Uh, and so in that regard, they're just values. And so can they add points to your roster or not? So don't get too tied to players. If a deal like works like in your favor and you think it's good, do it. And I think trading is really fun, obviously, because I made 61 trades or whatever you said. And I think the league is more fun when we trade more. So just encourage you guys to trade.
Those are good closing words. So that'll conclude us, and we'll see you guys next time.
Adios.